Hi Emma, how are you?
Yeah, good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Thank you for coming today to have a discussion with me about the new normal.
Yeah.
I know from speaking to you that we've both been fielding a lot of questions from our clients about what the future holds for their workforce. And I know particularly you've been helping candidates and employers with interviews. Has that changed a lot over the pandemic?
Definitely. I think it's been the catalyst for clients to kind of get into the future a little bit and utilise video more so than ever. And clients have also adapted their way of thinking around the structure, and it's become more important to get something out of every stage of the interview process.
Sure. Do you think your clients get the same sort of sense of a candidate as they did previously with a face-to-face interview?
Yeah, I hope so. I think everyone has to adapt, and we have to engage with employees differently, and that includes from the get go with an interview process. So I think we utilise video where we can, but really that human touch has not been completely removed from a lot of clients, but certainly the shortening. Kind of getting a short list of candidates that's relevant, and then invite them into an interview is being utilised.
So I was just wondering, with clients doing more video calls for interview purposes, whether or not they might adopt psychometric testing.
Yeah, it's something that we've definitely thought about. However, we've not noticed a spike in that, and there's been no more requests than we would normally anticipate within a rolling 3-month period. Now that may change over, when clients want to engage more with more C-suite clients, candidates potentially, but I haven't noticed a difference in it.
Okay. So in terms of the recruitment process and the offer of employment going out to candidates, has that changed at all?
Yeah, so I've been occasionally asked when a client is making an employment offer to a candidate if they've been vaccinated, and I'd love to hear your thoughts as to whether that is something that an employer can ask.
Yeah, certainly an employer can ask that information, but because it's medical information, it's very sensitive information. It's categorised as special category information under the GDPR and the Data Protection Act. So it can be asked, but the employer needs to ensure that they've got a privacy notice that they've sent to the candidate beforehand, which explains about how that data is going to be used, how it's going to be stored, and that sort of thing. So if, for example, the candidate ultimately wasn't successful or the offer was withdrawn, then that information would need to be destroyed by the employer.
Oh, right, okay, brilliant. So whilst I've not been asked this yet, Ben, I do think it's only a matter of time before one of my clients makes a conditional offer based on whether a candidate's been vaccinated.
Yes.
Is that something that...
Yes, I get asked,
Okay.
asked that question quite a lot, and it's very controversial at the moment. So there are some employers who have already insisted on that for new employees. So there's a couple of plumbing companies that I can think of based in London. There is a risk of discrimination. The reason being is, of course, not the whole population has been vaccinated yet. It's been done by age, so there's an issue of potential age discrimination there. Okay. Also disability discrimination, that some people can't have the vaccination for whatever reason. Pregnant ladies may be reluctant or to have the vaccination, therefore there may be pregnancy-related discrimination there. So at the moment, I wouldn't be advising clients to adopt that policy, or if they do, to be very, very careful about it. I've been asked a similar question by clients, which is about their employees returning back to the office and whether or not they can insist on those employees having vaccinations, and if they refuse, can they dismiss those employees? And again, the same issues of discrimination arise. Also, if an employee has more than 2 years service, they may be able to claim unfair dismissal. So the likely reason that an employer would rely on to dismiss an employee would be that of some other substantial reason, which is kind of like a catch-all category for a reason to dismiss somebody. And whether or not that dismissal would then be fair would be based on issues like the importance of that person being vaccinated within that particular sector. And the government is making changes to the Health and Social Care Act so that frontline staff who are working with elderly people can be required to ensure that their employees are vaccinated. And I think if there's an SOSR dismissal arising from that, I think that's far more likely to be fair because it's a government requirement. I think the other thing is lateral flow testing. If somebody is refusing to have a vaccine, then there's also the option of lateral flow testing for them, which partly alleviates the employee's risk of them passing COVID within the office. So I think that might be a more proportionate response.
Okay, brilliant. So I suppose the most pressing question and decision that many businesses and our clients are facing at the moment is whether or not to bring employees back who have been working from home, and how they kind of go about returning to the office.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, about just over a third of employees have been working from home over the pandemic, according to the Office of National Statistics. So I absolutely agree that this is going to be a really key decision for employers. I think whether or not employers requiring staff to return back to the office is mainly going to be an operational one. So I know of a lot of financial institutions based in London and around the world are requiring staff to come back to the office. But I think a lot of employers will go for home working or a hybrid option. In most cases, an employer, if there's a good business reason to requiring staff to return back to the office, will be able to ask their staff to return back to the office. The exception for that is if the employee has a belief that returning back to the office will put them or somebody else in imminent danger. So there's this, I think it's the statutory test is serious and imminent danger. But otherwise, I think it's largely an operational question. Some employees may be reluctant to return back to the office, and I suspect that there's going to be a lot of flexible working requests put in. So a flexible working request, it can be made by an employee at any time, and they may well request to work from home because they've got used to the benefits of working from home. Because of course less travel, less expense, better work-life balance. Now if a flexible working request is put in, then an employer has a legal obligation to consider that request. If they're going to refuse or potentially refuse the request, then they need to have a meeting with their employee and discuss as to what the business need is with the employee to have them back in the office. So I think that's going to be a key consideration.
Yeah, right. So what are the working from home legal requirements then from a client perspective?
Okay, so there is some things that an employer is required to do and some things which are good practice. So a risk assessment is definitely a key thing. So risk assessment in relation to home working. One element of home working is likely to be lone working as well. So it's not just the risk of the person being at home, it's also about them being at home potentially alone. So what if the employee had an accident, those sorts of things. So a lot of employers will be in contact with their staff during the day anyway, via email, video conferencing, so on and so forth. But it's about having mechanisms in place to be able to put in action a plan should the employer think there's something potentially wrong at home. The other issue is how to conduct that risk assessment. So some employees are literally going to an employee's house to make sure that their desk is set up correctly and that sort of thing. So if an employer wants to do that, then that right should really be reflected within the contract of employment. Most employers are asking employees to do their own assessments or contribute to a risk assessment. And then it'd be just about mitigating that risk. The other issue is making sure that staff have the correct equipment at home. So an office chair, office equipment, and that sort of thing. And the employee needs to think about the insurance in relation to that. So if the employee's house is broken into, whose insurance would pick up the loss of that computer equipment? the other issue is confidentiality. So when I work from home, everything is on the computer. Computer's encrypted. I work in the office by myself, so there's nobody coming in or out. Although I have very, very little paperwork because we're supposedly paperless. I say supposedly, but it's just not 100% possible. But the paperwork that I do have is always kept in a locked cabinet. But again, it's about the employer making sure that those facilities are there, not transporting documents to and from work if there's hybrid working. If there's a destruction of documents, how's an employee going to do that? Because the GDPR requirements and data protection requirements on an employer apply equally as when an employee is at home as when they're in the workplace. So it's about making sure those policies are up to date. And staff monitoring, which is something we've already discussed, about when somebody's working from home, how are they going to be monitored? If, for example, emails are monitored, then the employer's policies in relation to that need to be up to date, and the employer's privacy notice, so the employee is aware of what's being monitored, how that information is going to be used by the employer.
Brilliant. And how should employers get staff back to the office following furlough and the COVID anxiety?
Certainly, I think an open discussion and also lots of notice about returning back to the office. I've been recommending to my clients that for employees who are reluctant to return back to the office, that they come and visit the office, that the employer discusses the risk assessment with them if part of their anxiety is around COVID and the implications of COVID, so they can see the social distancing, so they can see the measures that have been put in place, and again it's managing that period of change through employee consultation. I had a client contact me about a pregnant employee who was reluctant to get on the bus to travel to and from work, which is totally understandable. And in that particular situation, that person was potentially clinically vulnerable. So depending on how far she was through her pregnancy, she may well be considered clinically vulnerable. And although it's different for different employees depending on the reason for why they're clinically vulnerable, but in relation to pregnancy, if the risk assessment says that there's a substantial risk to the pregnant employee, which there may well be for an employee who's more than 28 weeks pregnant, that the employer has to suspend them on full pay. It's a little unclear as to whether or not an employer can use furlough in those circumstances, but I think an employer wouldn't be criticised for using furlough in those circumstances. But if they do, then the salary of the employee needs to be topped up to 100%, because otherwise the employee just simply wouldn't agree to be furloughed on 80% when they could be suspended on the grounds of their pregnancy at full pay. But again, it's about discussing with the employee their concerns and taking it slowly and giving lots of notice to encourage employees back to the workplace. Flexible working requests, I think it's going to see a sharp increase in that, with employees asking to work flexibly from home. And as I say, their employer needs to then consider that request and go through a statutory process and determine whether or not the application can be agreed to, or whether or not they were to refuse it.
One of my clients has adapted lateral flow testing into their business. So they make it a requirement for every member of the team to do it every 4 days. And he's actually asked whether the candidates that are due to go on interview would be happy to do that. So he's giving them the opportunity more so. Is that something that you see is a viable or kind of useful?
Yes,
to adopt, yeah.
I do. I think that is definitely a reasonable request, because it's non-invasive. I mean, it's unpleasant. I've done many of them myself. I did one this morning. So whilst certainly lateral flow tests are unpleasant to take, I think it does fall within a reasonable management instruction to do that if you're going to be in contact with people in the office environment.
Let's say you've got children or dependents, and you're relying on being that carer in case they're sent home from school due to isolation. What would your advice be to employers to how to manage that and kind of offer? Would the hybrid working kick back in? Would they need to change their contract? What would that be something that you'd have to consider?
Sure. Well, I've been in that situation myself a number of times over the pandemic. An employer can provide dependency leave and is required to provide dependency leave, which is effectively unpaid leave, whilst the parent looks after the child, because of course in those circumstances it may well be that nobody else can look after the child because of isolation restrictions. But again, it's an issue that needs to be discussed with the employee and their individual circumstances. Emma, I'm presuming that Strand recruitment staff were predominantly office-based prior to the pandemic.
Yeah, so we worked 5 days a week from the office, the standard traditional working week really, and there was no option to change it. It wasn't in a discussion. We were really happy with the team dynamic. It's a traditional sales office, you get that energy from everyone, and then actually now we've become translated into more of a work from home. So that's the plan at the moment, to stay like that. I'm confident that as we go on, we will maybe convert into more of a hybrid. I can definitely see the benefits of that. But I would definitely suggest that clients look at themselves as an individual bubble, because what works for my business does not necessarily translate into what works for your business, and what works for your sector more so. And I know there's lots of great moves in kind of bigger PLC companies. Barclays were quite early at saying that they didn't see the point of these big city offices and what's not. But actually, it's about what works for your team as an individual. And so we've engaged with the team on a basis of, actually now, how does it work for you and your family? And is it something that, that you see the benefits for, or is it something that you would like more discussion along? And actually, it's been a resounding, really happy to work from home situation, and that's fine for now. But I would definitely say that clients need to look at themselves as an individual isolated case and what works for their team.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, from an environmental aspect as well, and working from home means less travel. And I think with the trade deals that the government are putting in place with Australia and America, there would otherwise potentially have been more flights, but I think there's definitely going to be a push towards using IT solutions to reduce travel, and I think that's going to become ever more the way of the world for those staff that were traditionally previously office based.
Yeah, definitely.
So thank you very much, Emma, for coming along and having a chat with me about the new normal, and I'm sure Strand will be going from strength to strength. And
thank you.
Yeah,
Look forward to working with you in the future.
You too.
Great.